My name is Richard Peikoff, even though that's already written down, just in case people don't know how to pronounce what they're reading, it's Peikoff. Peikoff is a Russian name. It's actually specifically Ukrainian. My grandparents, Russian Jews, had to get out of Kiev at the turn of the century, otherwise they were going to be killed. So they came to Winnipeg, Manitoba, took 40 acres and a mule, and all the Peikoff family came out of Winnipeg. If you ever meet another Peikoff, we're all related. So, but I'm the only one that came to Maribala, because I don't know anybody else that came to Maribala. Although some of the other members in my family respect Maribala, just so you know. And I first heard about Baba, this is interesting too, in 1969. Couple of months after he passed, dropped his body. And I was living in Los Angeles, where I was born and raised. And I had been playing guitar for years, and I know there's a lot of musicians in the Maribaba community. I didn't meet them for another 10 years, 7 to 10 years. 7 years, I think. But I remember driving over to Pasadena to a meeting that the Maribaba group had in Pasadena at the time. It's 1969. And I stood outside the door of the meeting and I listened to the meeting from outside, and I didn't go in. This is funny, you know, because I had a pocket, in my pocket at all times I had one of the blue, you know, the original triple discourses in that kind of turquoise blue color. I always had one of the volumes in my back pocket, always. I think my favorite was volume 2 for some reason. But they got shredded after some point. And so I knew about Bob in 69. I came to the meeting in Pasadena. I listened to it outside the door for about 10, 12 minutes, and then I turned away, and I didn't come back and meet the group until 7 years later. In 1976, when I met a musician by the name of John Lind, who at the time was married to Frankie Lind, had a daughter named Jenny, and John was a famous singer-songwriter and was a Bob lover. Knew Pete Townsend, worked with Pete Townsend, Billy Nichols, did a lot of work at Oceanic. And he introduced me to Phyllis Frederick. And of course, if you introduce to Phyllis Frederick, then you're also going to be introduced to Adele, because she was there too. And Adele was quite a character. And I'll tell you about Adele in just a minute. So we would go down and we would drive down to Hermosa Beach once a week, and we would sit in on these Baba meetings at Phyllis's house. They were beautiful. And for any of you that didn't know Phyllis, she worked at Mattel, and she was just a really kind of, she was so grounded, this woman, so really grounded woman. And I would consider, she may not have officially been considered a Western Mandali, but I'd throw her in that category. Tell you the truth, you know, because, you know, she was like that for us. We had a lot of people in Los Angeles too, a lot of Baba lovers in Los Angeles. We were in a small group, you know, had a couple hundred. And then in 1977, I had the opportunity to come across country. I drove with John and Frankie Lynn and Jenny, and about 2 days worth of fried chicken in our Toyota station wagon. We drove from Los Angeles to Myrtle Beach in 2 3/4 days. We all arrived with road fever. We were sick as hell. I mean, that's fast. And I think we went through the chicken in about a day and a half. And the reason we came out was because that particular Christmas there was a gathering of all these women, Western women, Mandali, if I'm not mistaken, including Phyllis, but also Margaret Krask, Kitty. Remind me of some of the other Western Mandali women.
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth would have been there.
Jane.
Jane. I'll tell you a story about Jane just a minute. Jane was there. Phyllis was there. Adele was there. What's Adele's last name?
Walken.
Walken, right. And it was this big gathering. It was absolutely amazing. And that's the first time I had a sense of Baba's Western home. And I don't know where I stayed, but it didn't really matter. But I just remember all these women being in the meeting place, and it was completely packed. Jim Meyer might have played music for that event. He probably did because it was a big event. It was a Christmas event. And that's when it really solidified. In '77, when I came back, the Los Angeles Center had a temporary center. It's on Santa Monica Boulevard in West Los Angeles. A fellow named Ken Havens, good carpenter, went in and he put together the interior of the center. And when he was finished, they asked me to be the caretaker of the center. So I lived at the center in Los Angeles. And I had a little room with an accordion door, right? And a little bed and a coffee pot and a microwave and whatever. And then there was a little private bathroom also upstairs that was supposed to only be for me, but everyone used it anyway. And then downstairs there was a bathroom for the public, but no one paid attention to that. And I kept the center meticulously clean at all times. Every pillow was completely, looked like something out of home, furnishing or something like that. It was always vacuumed. Anybody ever came over any day, not just on meetings days, but just like, because I've been like that since I was 5 years old. I'm just totally a neatnik. So it was very natural. I was also working at the Cheesecake Factory at that time, owned by a Sufi, David Overton, if anyone's heard of his name. We had one restaurant, Sat 99. Now he has 150 restaurants, plus high-end restaurants. It's on the stock exchange as Cake, right? And he later on introduced me, and I was able to have 2 private interviews with Murshida Avidus because of him. He took me up to Walnut Creek as his guest. I was his head waiter in the Beverly Hills store, and also assistant manager. And that's where I met Jeff McGuire. And many of you people know Jeff McGuire because he was like the most incredibly sought-after MC of any kind of sahabas that took place in Los Angeles for years. He was a wonderful director. He was an unknown director, and when I first met him, he didn't believe in Meher Baba. So the directors are always, the writers, he's a writer, so writers are smart. So they're always kind of grilling him. Not fooling around when they have conversations with you. So debates, I felt I was losing debates, but at some point I didn't have to stop convincing about Meher Baba. He had a 180 on his own. And then he suddenly was blitzed. He couldn't stop talking about Meher Baba. So we're now working at the Cheesecake Factory together. John Lynn's coming in, he's a Baba lover. David Overton owns the place, he's a Baba lover. You can't get away from Meher Baba. I'm the caretaker in Los Angeles, I'm a Baba lover. And it's nothing but Baba. It's 1977.
I want to say one thing. He went to Hampshire College, and he got in with
Amherst.
Yeah, with what's his name too, like Karen did, with the professor.
Right?
Right.
Oh, there's a professor at Amherst that was
Ray
famous?
Carpenter. It's in Amherst, but he went to Hampshire College,
Hampshire
where my
College.
daughter went and my son-in-law.
Right.
Yeah. So.
So,
But go ahead.
interestingly enough, John Lynn, who's my first contact that brought me to the group to meet Phyllis Frederick in '76. 7 years after, I'd already been walking around with copies, and I heard about Baba not in Los Angeles but in Berkeley. I'd gone up on a gymnastics scholarship to the University of Washington, and when I came down, I visited my friends in Berkeley, and everybody loved Meher Baba. It didn't matter whether you were a Meher Baba devotee or not. Everyone realized the man was authentic. There was no dirt on Meher Baba ever. There's no sexual scandals. There was no money things. There was nothing. You couldn't find it. It was impeccable. It's like good luck. Trying to dig up something on Meher Baba because you couldn't. And I've in the years that followed, in decades when I was part of Zen Center of San Francisco meditating, because as a Jewish people, as a Jew, as bar mitzvah, kind of a wandering Jew. So there was a lot of wandering Jews, and Jews always made it to Zen Center just to sit zazen. And even the Zennies got to like Meher Baba because they were reading God Speaks and they were going, oh my God, we have a lot of stuff to read here, but nothing's like this. So whenever I post stuff on Facebook, all my Zen friends say, and I put up pictures of Meher Baba, they all say, we love Meher Baba. So there you go. And the Zennies are not theistic. They're non-theistic. They don't believe in God, but they like Meher Baba. So, oh, by the way, just so you know, as a Gemini with a Virgo rising, I have a tendency to tell 9 stories at the same time. And that being the case, I do ultimately get back to the same where I started, but so you'll have to kind of put up with that. It's one of my things. But as a matter of fact, I'm inspired to have my next band. I want to be called the 10 Gentlemen, where all members of the band start at the same place, but at the end of the song, we're all in different parts. You know. So we start off sounding nice and pop. At the end, we sound like Miles Davis and Bitches Brew. You know what I mean? So the 10 Gentlemen is my next band. But I came back and I became the caretaker of the Mayor Baba Center. I was there for 2 years. We had this lovely older woman downstairs who worked the bookstore on a daily basis. Her name was Neva. And, you know, so we didn't have a lot of traffic, but people came in. And then we had the capacity for maybe 60 people in the upstairs, especially if they were using the pillows. We also put up chairs for people that couldn't sit on the pillows. And while I was there, for the 2 years that I was there, I started writing letters out to Bill LePage, Anthony Thorpe, to India, to Israel. I created a round-the-world tour coming from Los Angeles through Tahiti and into Australia and then into India. And Bill LePage was going to be my host, first time to India, 1979.
Australia.
From Australia. I had to get to Australia first. So I didn't come to India from Los Angeles through London or whatever. I came through Hawaii and through Tahiti. And I arrived I go to see Anthony Thorpe, who was living in the South Island, New Zealand. And the North Island is volcanic and the South Island is glacial. So as soon as you cross over from the smallest city on the North Island, which is right at the edge, like a little San Francisco, I forget its name, it starts with a W. You're on the North Island, and you're talking about Alps, and you're also talking about surfers that are wearing wetsuits with only their eyes available. That's it, because it's so cold out in those waters, right? But they're surfing. Every surfer surf everywhere. And at Anthony Thorpe's address in Christchurch, and he was a beautiful man, architect, and definitely a devoted Mayor Baba devotee. His address was 3 Flowers Track. Now, who has a dress like 3 Flowers Track? Christchurch, New Zealand. You know what I mean? Beautiful. Fantastic coast. Full family. Gave me a room by myself. I spent about 10 days down there. And then I went to Hobart, Tasmania to visit 2 other Mayor Baba lovers. And Tasmania was more like Christchurch than it was like Australia, even though it's Australian. And then I went and landed in Sydney, and I worked for Bill LePage for 6 weeks, pushing a broom and doing inventory in his export-import business just to have something to do. Met some friends there and some good musicians. Played music there. And then I went up to Avatar's abode. Now this is a great story because I'd always heard about Francis Brabazon. And I heard that he was kind of a hard guy to get to know. And I went up and I was staying with a caretaker named Reg Paffel in a double trailer, and I had my own little room. And Bill Page was serving dinner every night for everybody that was at Avatar's abode at the time. So I go over to the meeting room one afternoon, which is a building in which Francis has has a suite of rooms in the corner of this building. And the meeting room is this like little gym with bleachers. It's a tiny version of a basketball gym. It's like a badminton thing, you know what I mean? Small, you know. And in the corner of this gym is this 3/4 size kid's guitar, little one, like for a kid. Wasn't even like an adult guitar. I picked it up because I'm a guitar player. Been playing since I was 11 years old. Had my first band in Los Angeles, by the way, called the Smoggy Mountain Boys. That was 1964 because it was smoggier than hell. And we loved the Foggy Mountain Boys, so we were called the Smoggy Mountain Boys. And my voice hadn't changed yet, so I was 13. I was singing all the tenor parts on top of 3 other guys and playing great guitar. We had banjo, guitar, fiddle, bass, dobro, mandolins, 4-part harmony, and a lot of corny jokes. And I pick up this guitar in the meeting room, and I tune it up, and I just sit down. The acoustics are really beautiful. I must have played for about 45 minutes. Unbeknownst to me, Francis was listening in his room. He didn't come into the meeting place, he just listened. And at dinner that night, I'm sitting, and he has this little Tammy thing on his head. He's probably in his, well, it must have been his late 70s, early 80s at the time. This is 1979. He says, "Richard, are you the guy that picked up the guitar and played it in the meeting hall today?" I said, "Yeah, it was me." And he said, "I want you to meet somebody." And I said, "Okay." So he arranges this evening. I'll never forget this, because this completely changed my head around about Francis Brabazon. And if anyone doesn't know who Francis Brabazon, it's like God's poet, basically. And, that guy lived a life. I mean, in order to be able to sustain himself as an artist, he did everything from sheep shearing to, being an elevator operator. You know what I'm talking about? There was nothing that he wouldn't do in order to continue writing. And he wasn't just writing love poems. Who's that author, that poet in the 60s that made a bunch of money for himself writing commercial poems? They weren't very, he was famous, but you'd remember him in just a minute. Yeah, but Brabazon's poems were completely different. So Brabazon, he says to me at dinner, he says, "Were you the guy playing the guitar? And were you playing the guitar in the meeting hall today?" I said, "Yeah, I was, because it was I wasn't traveling with a guitar, because I was traveling around the world, and I figured everyone has a guitar." So he says, "I want you to meet somebody." I said, "Great." And this is where my whole thing with Brabazon changed. At that point, he was kind of intimidating. I'd already seen him on the property. He walked around. But you just didn't go up to him and say, "Hey, Francis, what's going on?" Because, you had to the guy had a zone around him, you know what I mean? It's like you had to kind of, it's almost like later on when I met Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, he had that same thing. Or Tom Petty, the same thing. You can only let you in if they invite you in, right? You can't,
Right.
It's protective. And so Francis sets up this evening with Sam Saunders, who was a heck of a classical guitar player in Australia. Lives somewhere around the abode. He may have even had a house on the abode. And he had this really nice high-end, and for anyone who plays guitar, a Ramirez classical guitar. And this is like the real deal. Probably at that point in '79 they were worth about $2,500. Today they're probably worth about $12,000 to $15,000. Yeah, I think this was Brazilian rosewood. Brazilian rosewood guitars are like $6,000, $7,000 more than a regular guitar. And Sam was a really accomplished classical player. So Francis sets up a table on the veranda, which kind of wraps around the meeting hall, and he has his assistant serve us tea. So we have a nice big pot of tea and 3 cups, and Sam is sitting on one end of the table, and I'm sitting on the other end of the table, and Francis is in between us. And Sam plays for about 10, 12 minutes. Some nice, beautiful things, some, Latin stuff, classical stuff, gorgeous music. And then he hands the guitar over the table in front of Francis, and he gives it to me, and I sit down and start playing some nice Celtic finger-picking stuff and some drop tunings and so forth, and completely different style of music. But I've been playing for a decade, so they both were a high-end, presentation. And Brabazon is basically turning left to right, depending on who has the guitar in his hand, and he's just sighing. Oh. You know what I mean? This guy wrapped his ears around you like nobody else did. And that's when I knew who he was. And this is one of the big heavies as far as Mandali are concerned. And but it was so fabulous that he was sighing and not just once. I mean, every little motif that was like would move you. He emote something. And man, that guy could listen. And that's a big art, by the way. Before you can do anything, and we have a fine percussionist here sitting with us, Cliff Hackford, who will attest to this. Before you play anything, you have to hear it. You have to learn how to hear things first before you can just sit and play things. If you don't know how to listen, you don't know how to play. And Brabazon reminded both Sam and I how deep the attribute of listening was. And I could see why he was God's poet, because this man knew how to listen. And then I went to India with Bill, and that was my first time. It's 1979. All the Mandali were alive. At least I think they were. I met Padre, who I think was actually my favorite. I loved Erich, but don't get me wrong, because Erich was like, the king of the stories and so forth. But Padre, you could sit on his couch and on his porch and talk to him about anything from motorcycles to meditation. It didn't matter. And also he was the homeopathist in Lower Mehrabad. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was kind of in charge of Muhammad, because Muhammad's hut was only across the way. And he had this American guy studying homeopathy with him, who's still with him. Who am I thinking of? You know what I'm talking about?
Straight. What's his first name? Straight?
Bob
Street?
Street?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
Dr. Bob.
Yeah, Dr. Bob. And
Yeah.
Bob was a young student of his. But he was he had a little room and so forth. So Lower Mehrabad at that point I don't think Ted Judson had gotten involved and built the center yet. It was different. It was a little rougher. And the people in Lower Mehrabad were Padre, Muhammad, Mansari up on the hill, who always had teas and liked to bake. If you hadn't met Mansari, she was this woman, I think she was probably about 4'8", maybe. Weighed probably about 80 pounds. And was one of the best grandmothers you'd ever want. As a matter of fact, all the Mandali, male and female, were they were like grandmothers and grandfathers for all of us. I felt. Like the best grandparents you could ever have. And they all had their own unique personalities. Nobody tried to be anybody else but themselves. But they were the ones that were mostly in Mehrabad, upper and lower. And then at that time, in 79, a big bus would come once or twice a week. Big bus. And everybody would pile out of Mehrabad and we get on this bus. There must have been 60 of us at least. And we all had this 3-tin lunch thing that had been prepared with us. Really good little sandwiches with avocado and cream cheese or whatever, and desserts and the whole deal. And by the way, at no time when you were at Lower Mehrabad were you concerned about health, because there was always filtered water, and Alan Wagner was like the head chef there. And then later on, when Ted Judson built the center that's there today, I would imagine, expanded on, if you were inside the Pilgrim Center, you were safe. Now, what you couldn't do is brush your teeth with tap water. That was a mistake. You don't want to do that. But drinking water was all filtered, cooking was all filtered. And so when they gave you lunch, we'd all have lunch, and we'd go out to Mehrabad, and we would sit around. And at that time in Mehrabad, I remember...
Meherzad,
in Meherzad, thank you. We arrived there and, invaded the Mandali. And everybody you can think of that you'd ever heard of was still alive. Every one of them. Erich, of course, and Mani, Mera, Meru, Pendu, Bal, Natu, who always wore a scarf around his neck. I don't know why. Was that a fashionable thing, or did he have a problem with his neck? He had something going on with his neck.
health.
Bao, Dr. Gohair, who gave me a vitamin B shot in my butt because I was kind of a little bit tired. So she just said, "Well, come on over to the clinic," and boom, right on. Didn't even think about it. Pull on your shorts, in my glutes, and hello, that felt good. And I was really pretty, after that for weeks, it felt good. Gohair was an interesting woman. She was very worldly because she ran the medical clinic. So she was different than other Mandali in the sense that she was kind of like Mani. Mani was in town with the, running the trust. So she was in the world and out of the world, even though she had done all these different things. And Gohair also was like that. Other people could pull back and be more private. Mansari, because completely isolated up on Upper Mehrabad. Except if you went over and had a cup of tea, and then she was like, you were her favorite best friend, for the next hour. And There was a Mandali that I loved to go and give a hug to. That was Pendu. I didn't know very much about him, except I knew that he was really, really strong, and then I think he had a stroke, and he sat in this kind of recliner with an ottoman, and you went up and you gave him a hug, and you had to lean into him because he was sitting up, he was in his chair, but as soon as he put his arms around you, he gave you a hug. It was like, hello, watch it. You know, you'd be out of breath in about 5 seconds if you didn't watch it. I mean, he's a very strong guy. And I believe at that time he used to love to have the paper read to him, you know, especially like cricket scores and stuff like that. That was his thing. And then, you know, the Mandali Hall was a beautiful setting. Erich kind of reclining against a pillow and telling stories. And yet here was another opportunity just to meet more grandmothers and more grandfathers. I'm talking about the best grandparents you can possibly ever think. And I'm a baby boomer, so most of the people in '79, we would have been about 28 to 30 years old, something like that, 32 years old. We were young. And these guys were fantastic, all of them. And then Mara would be, you know, she'd be in Mandali Hall. She would sit whenever there was a talk or a film or a slideshow. All the gathering of the people that visit would sit around in various different places in the hall. Erich would always sit against one kind of wall, leaning against a couch, and the women Mandali would sit in the back on chairs. And I'll tell you a story that's kind of really beautiful, because Monty was a musician, and she knew that I was a musician as well. And I sometimes confuse the '79 visit with the '91 visit, but she came up to me once and she said, we're going to have a slideshow presentation. Would you mind playing some guitar behind the slideshow? I said, oh, I'd be honored to play some guitar. Now this is like playing live music for like a film track, you know what I mean? So, and the cool thing was that I sat down, I was sitting down kind of off to the side, and I was watching the slideshow, which was on this side of the hall. Erich was there. The women Mandali were there. Everybody else was sitting around. And a slide would come on. It'd be all about slides with Mira Bob in it. And then all the women Mandali, it's about all of them. And there was people that I can't remember their names, you know. So, I mean, there were other women I'm not mentioning, like
Katie. Maybe Arnavaz, I don't know.
Arnavaz, yeah, Arnavaz reminded me of an Italian actress. She looked. I kept thinking, like, you know, she was gorgeous. And Sophia Loren. When I looked at Arnavaz, I always thought about Sophia Loren for some reason. And they were all sitting, and then a slide would come on, and they'd all talk up to themselves first, you know, about, you know, this, and it's like girlish giggling around in the background, you know, and then one of them would say something. Now I'm playing guitar music, right, to the slideshow, but as soon as one of them stepped forward to say something, my music dropped down, just like in a movie, you know, no longer, you know, just quiet. Just there, kind of drifting low in the soundtrack of the, you know, Monty would say something and Mara would say something, and then the next slide and the music would come up. You know, this next slide would come up, and sometimes there'd be a comment, sometimes there wouldn't be. There might be 2 or 3 slides that would come up, and then something would come up, and somebody else in the women would be triggered to say something. First there was all this giggling and girlish sharing. I was, oh yeah, I remember that, and then Go Hair would say something. Music would come down. You know, Go Hair would talk, and you know, I felt, this is great, man. This is like a live film track, you know what I mean? Monty came up and thanked me afterwards, because this went on for about, well, it was a good 30 to 40 minutes. And it was a real blessing. You know, I've been playing music since I was 11 years old. I'm 67 now. It's a big part of what I do. For me, I've always said music is God, and especially that was true when I learned about Mira Bob in 1969. Because I was playing a lot of guitar at that point. I've been playing since 1961. So, and I've continued this day. And so, to have anything to do with the Mandali that involves playing music, such as the Evening with Francis, that tea party went on for about 2 hours. he wouldn't let Sam and I go. And after that, it wasn't like I couldn't wave to Francis. You know what I mean? It was like, hey, Francis. He even came up to me for the peanut butter and jelly sandwich once. You know, just to say, hey, but I have an extra sandwich. You want it? I said, sure. So, and by the way, going to India with Bill LePage in 1979 was a fantastic experience because this guy knew how to negotiate. He never got taken by anybody on the street. So when I got bargaining for, you know, taxi fares or anything like that, he said, no, you walk away. They said, 500 rupees. He said, no, goodbye, get someone else. 400 for you, special a day. He got him down to like 150 rupees. Now, these guys could use some money. I mean, the difference between 150 rupees and 500 rupees is not that big of a deal to us. But still, LePage was a businessman and he used to bargain, so, and he was a good guy. There's a place we used to stop at Bombay as a kind of an overnight. It was an interesting place. There was a sign by, you know, it was devoted Mayor Baba followers it seemed like their purpose was to greet people coming to Bombay. You know what I'm talking about? They were lovely. I remember we had these nice little rooms that we stayed in, and they served us really clean food, and then we got on our way the next day. You could not come into India and travel to Ahmednagar on the same day. It was way too much energy. And they were lovely people. So I got to know all of Mandali in 77. Now the interesting thing in 77, I think this is a story worth telling, is this. There was a woman that came from Israel. Her name was Carrie Ben Shammai. She had just lost her husband. Now, the cool thing about this was her husband translated the discourses into classic Hebrew because he was an educator. It wasn't just like Hebrew slang. I mean, it was the real deal. This guy was a professor, right? And so you have the discourses, you know, in Jerusalem, for Christ's sakes, in classic Hebrew. And Carrie Ben Shammai was flipped out over Mayor Baba. The reason I mention Carrie Ben Shammai, because this again reflects on the nature of the Mandali. Carrie's in her 70s. She just lost her husband. Her husband was critical. Because who else is going to translate discourses into classic Hebrew? I was bar mitzvah, for Christ's sakes, you know what I mean? So, and I'll tell you about Hebrew is, it's a language that if you don't use it, you lose it. Because I went back to Israel on kibbutz years later, and I got pretty good at it. But I didn't use it after that, so you lose it. And Carrie came to, without telling any of the Mandali, she came to India to move there in her 70s. She was a highly neurotic woman, completely blitzed over the loss of her husband, and she couldn't stop talking. And I became her buddy and her valet, so that when we went to Marazan, I'd make sure her lunch was in my thing. So when it was lunchtime, I'd say, Carrie, come on over here, we have lunch together, and so forth. I have her lunch, water, whatever, and I'd make sure she got on and off the bus okay. And the Mandali were watching this relationship happening between me and Carrie. And Carrie had come to India wanting to move to India in her 70s from Israel. And they were going, oh, hold on a second, this is not such a good idea. You know what I'm talking about? It's hard enough for just young people to come here, let alone a 70-year-old woman. And Carrie was not much bigger than Mansari. So Monty comes up to me and she says, Richard, I see that you and Carrie have this kind of nice relationship, that she likes you very much and she trusts you. I said, she does, and we actually are, I like her very much. I'm not fooling around, you know. And, you know, the whole, you know, one of the great things about, backtrack is kind of the 10 gentlemen type thing. One of the great things about getting to know Mayor Baba and the Mayor Baba community is there's no proselytizing in the Mayor Baba community. It's not like the Hare Krishnas coming after you wanting to give you a copy of the Bhagavad Gita in the airport during the 60s for free, and then 2 minutes later tapping you on your shoulder for a donation. Do you remember that? I do. And LAX was like that. I have a Bhagavad Gita and come to our feast on Sunday. Oh, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. And 2 minutes is a tap on your shoulder. So, wouldn't you like to give us $20 for the copy of the Bhagavad Gita? I say, I thought you just gave it to me as a gift for Christ's sake. And I said, no, here, you have it back. I don't even. So there was never any proselytizing anywhere. And also no one in their right mind would take up the mantle of being the next leader of the rest of the Mandali. All they were, Mayor Bob's a hard act to follow, for Christ's sake. What are you supposed to do? Like say, okay, well, the Avatar is dead, so I'll take up the mantle and I'll just lead the group. Doesn't work that way. Mandali just shared their stories, shared and shared their stories until they just disappeared. And those of us who had the opportunity to be around them, to this day, I'll bet you everybody that's ever met somebody that's a Mandali Western, including Kitty and Margaret and Elizabeth and Phyllis, and I think Adele also was in that group, to tell you the truth. She was like, I'll tell you another story about Adele in just a minute. You know, once you get to meet them, there isn't. I went to a lot of spiritual communities I lived in for the next 30 years. Jewish seminaries and Christian communities in residence for 1 or 2 years. Zen communities, San Francisco Zen Center. I was the head chef at Tassajara during one of the summer seasons, which is a big honor. It's after I cooked French for 2 years and then donated my skills to the Salvation Army for one summer, and then I came and cooked for the Zen Center. That's when all the Zennies began to learn about Mayor Baba. And they also, we love Mayor Baba. And I'm going, Jesus Christ, you guys don't even believe in God. And you're like, Mayor Baba, what a surprise. So, Monty comes up to me, this is like my tangential thing, so you'll have to excuse me, but hopefully this is entertaining to anybody who's watching this. But Monty comes up and says, we're noticing, the Monty are noticing that Carrie and you get along really well. What's your plans on traveling? What's your traveling plans? I said, well, I'm traveling around the world and my next stop is Israel. And she said, oh, it is? Fantastic, because, Carrie's from Jerusalem. She says, do you mind escorting Carrie back to Jerusalem? I said, it'd be my pleasure. So sometime in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I get on however you get from Pune, not from Pune, but from Ahmednagar out to Bombay. And I remember that Bombay airport, that Carrie and I was in that airport for about 11 hours before the plane took off. And there weren't any chairs. So I had to kind of create my suitcase and my coat and stuff and make a pillow for her so she could kind of chill and bring her food and keep everything safe. Then we got on board. Then we went to Jerusalem. And this is a small woman. She's under 5 feet. So when I came into her apartment, the beds that were for both her and her husband were no longer than 5'1" or 5'2". That's it. They were little beds. And tucking her in was really easy. And I said, Carrie, okay, so you're home. And she was happy to be home. And the Mandali were very happy that she was back home in Jerusalem. And I said, I'm going to go now. I'm going to go look for a place in the old city for a couple of days, which I did. And I walked all around the old cities. I went to the YMCA hostel, the Jewish hostel, the Lutheran hostel, and everybody was kind of like, indifferent. And then I was walking down this street. Inside the old city is just nothing but walls that go straight up, and you're in this thing. There's all these different corridors and so forth of the city. It's beautiful. And I'm walking down the city and this corridor, and way up on a window, about 25 feet above my head, this young kid, about 13, 16, out the window. He says, "Are you looking for a place to stay?" And I said, "I am." Now, I just left Carrie about 2 hours ago, and he comes down and he shows me these 2 big rooms, one for women, one for men, and I stay there with him for 2 days, and he's my guide through Jerusalem, and then I come back to the United States. So I come back to India. Then I came back to the Cheesecake Factory. I worked a little bit in studios and a number of different things. I started teaching and traveled a little bit. Then I went back to India in '91, and this was a very interesting trip. This is a very emotional trip for me because it was somewhere between '91 and '93. I had been living on a progressive Christian ranch in Colorado called Sunrise Ranch. It was part of the Emissaries of Divine Light, EDL, which was controversial. It's one of those communities that always had some kind of like dirt. You know what I mean? The founder of that community believed in trysts, 1 guy and 2 women. Well, right there, that kind of throws the whole Mayor Baba thing down the toilet, because either you're on your own or you're connected to somebody. I don't think Mayor Baba had anything to say bad or good about gay relationships, but trysts, I don't know offhand. But you wouldn't. I don't think you would have looked on kindly on one guy and two women. And there was this whole generation that kind of grew up with that in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. The baby boomers came in the 70s, and when I came there, it was in the late 80s out of Boulder. And I liked the community. I liked the men and women who lived there. So I worked there for about 4 or 5 years, but I didn't get involved with the politics, the spiritual politics of the community. Played a lot of guitar, worked my butt off in the kitchen. I loved it. And then I came to India. But first I came to Myrtle Beach. And Jane Haynes was alive. And Phyllis and Lynn Ott were alive. If anyone knows anything about Lynn Ott, at that point, he was quite the artist. And at that point, he was losing his vision. So I think he had like about this much to look through when he painted, right? He would just kind of go on the canvas and paint to whatever he could see. And Lynn and Phyllis also painted. And Jane let me stay in the center for 3 months before I went to India. 3 months. Then I parked my car in the parking lot that everyone parks their car in for another 3 months while I was back in India. Then I come back from India and she gives me another 3 months. So for 9 months I was exposed to nothing but Meher Baba, Meher devotees, Mandali, and so forth. Now the cool thing is, on the center itself, Kitty was still alive, and when you went over to Kitty's house for lunch, she would serve things like grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Wasn't anything special. It was like something kids would like, you know what I mean? Grilled cheese and tomato soup. Well, we didn't go over for lunch. We just went over to hang out with Kitty, you know what I mean? So grilled cheese and tomato was fine. We loved that. And Kitty was really kind of a whole other character too. I loved her energy. I met Delia in London, by the way, Delia de Leon. I swear to God, she must have been at that Christmas thing. It seems like she was there too, along with the other Mandali, the Western Mandali. And then I met with her in her apartment, had tea at her apartment when I lived and taught in London. So I go back to India, and Jane, so gracious, and let me stay there for such a long time. When I came back from India 3 months later, I was staying in the Coop, which is the smallest little building on the property. But I was so on fire with music, it didn't really matter at that point. I played guitar all the frickin' time. And out of this little building, just outside the meeting hall, you'd be hearing this amazing, just all day long. Fortunately, I wasn't disturbing anybody because the meeting place was behind me. There was outside rec areas here. There might have been a bathroom over here, maybe not. And all the other buildings were far away, so I just guitar and guitar and guitar and guitar. And I just come back from playing guitar 12 to 14 hours a day in India. It was like being a kid again. And I made an album. It's called Monsoon Season. Sherry R's been selling it for 25 years. Although I can't seem to get them to buy any more copies for some reason, but they should. They only have one copy left. I don't want to make them feel guilty or anything like that, but come on, for Christ's sakes. So I'm on fire. I've just finished playing 12, 14 hours, recording a beautiful album in the study hall. And if anyone knows anything about the study hall, I believe it was some kind of fortress or water thing or something that the British had for the longest time. Then the Meher Baba community, under the direction of Baba, built a second floor to that thing. And that became the home of the Western Mandali. Now the upstairs study hall was nothing but plaster, glass, wood, and tile. But there was 2 rooms with a big archway between them. So the high ceiling. So the natural acoustics in this room was phenomenal. So after studying and playing for 12, I was like 4 sessions, 3 hours a day. And I still had time to play chess with Jim Mystery, who liked his Jack Daniels black, by the way, and Black Label, and take naps and take showers Indian style. And if you've ever been to, I don't know if they still have it, but it's a drought. So for us to take a shower, we would sit on a stool in a shower stall with a 5-gallon But this is how it's done. Okay, 5-gallon bucket of scalding hot water and a cup that you can actually then take the cold water and mix it in with the scalding hot water, and you can wet yourself and bathe. It was fun. It was more fun than hell. It was unbelievable. And the nice thing was that if you were good at it, by the time you got clean, you still had about 20 to 25% of the water in your bucket, which at that point had kind of come down to just perfect temperature. And then you could, at the very end, take the bucket and go like this. And it was whoosh, shower, you know, unbelievable. That was your shower. That was your bath. And so I go back to India in '91 with all this beautiful care at the center as a send-off and a return. And one of the first things the Mandali say to me, especially Mani, is they come up and they thank me for the 14 years earlier for the way that I took Carrie Ben Shammai back to Jerusalem. 14 years later, Meru said something to me, Mani said something to me, I think Goher did too. Thank you very much for taking Carrie Ben Shammai back to Jerusalem, because we didn't know what to do. I said, no problem. I tucked her in to her 5-foot bed, and that was it. And so sometimes it's nice to feel like you're a hero, especially to the Mandali. And the Mandali acknowledge you for something special. It's kind of like a little icing on the cake. And some, you know, you don't just walk around all day and go, you know, I guess I'm more like. No, you were given an opportunity to be a karma yogan, and that's a gift. If the Mandali give you an opportunity to act in a self-service, you know, that's a great opportunity. If they're asking you to do something, what are you going to say? Well, I'm sorry, I'm busy. Sorry, gotta go. No, you're saying thank you very much. You know. So, and then I play guitar. Alan Wagner introduced me to a tabla player named Parsuram Shirla. And he said, you know, Parsuram had a bad experience with some Westerners that came through several months ago, and they didn't treat him with respect when it came to playing and performing. So he's a little bit gun shy. And I said, that's not going to happen with me. So he took us over to this outbuilding, somewhere near the off the kitchen. And over the next 10 weeks, we learned about 25 to 40 of each other's words. Me in Hindi and him in English. But most of the time, we just smiled and laughed at the quality of music we were playing, because this guy could kick ass on tabla. And I was just wailing on guitar. I've been playing all day long. In the evenings, I'd play bluegrass and folk music with all the Australians and English guys, but most of the time I was playing my own compositions. And when I got together with Parsuram, it was like, whoa, you know. And Cliff, you could relate to this. You know, you're sitting around in a room for 2 hours playing. All it is guitar and tabla. That's quite an intimate relationship. There's nobody between you and the percussionist. There's no bass player, no other guitar player. There's solid guitar and somebody really playing tabla. And then Parsuram then came up and we recorded in the study hall I described to you, which at that point not only was acoustically gorgeous, but you could feel, and I don't say this very much, but you can feel the resonance of the women Mandali who had lived in this space. This was their home, and it was palpable. And we were a stone's throw away from the tomb, from the Samadhi, and also Mansari's house. So. And Hugh McDonald, who's definitely probably everyone knows, as he's 6 months in Palo Alto and 6 months there because he knows everything about everything from wiring to light bulbs to electricity to whatever. So he's like totally indispensable at Amartithi and half the other time. He's the recordist of this album. And we're up in the study hall, and it's kind of basic thing, but it's good. We captured it. And the only time we stopped was when a train was coming by, because the train would vibrate the room. So we would pause, and then we let the train go by, and then we start recording it. And I recorded this album in 6.5 hours. 3.5 hours on day one, solo work, and 3 hours on day two with Parsuram on tabla. And it's really, a lot of people have listened. It was the only instrumental Baba album at that time. No one had an instrumental Baba album. But because it was recorded in the study hall, Sherry Art took it on, but it also sold, you know, online and so forth. But Sherry Art's been a big supporter up until a couple of weeks ago. But the and I've held back 15 copies for them so they could have it. So the recording takes place. I share it with Monty before I come back to the United States. She signs off on it, gives me a blessing. And, you know, she plays a little sitar and so forth. She listens to the whole thing and she's like blown away. I had to go off-site to mix it. So I was in a hotel in Ahmednagar, and the first thing I did was I grabbed a big bucket of hot water and some bleach, and I turned every piece of furniture upside down and killed about 50 cockroaches because it was infested. And I'm a kind of a neat neck. So hell, if I'm going to sit around and mix an album with a bunch of cockroaches crawling around. So I cleaned that room, cleaner than that room in that hotel had ever been, period. And then anytime I went out and I ordered something, I always ordered everything well done. That was the way to do it. No chances, everything, anything. Nothing raw, everything. Oh, chicken? Yeah, burn it. So, and then I'm up in this little room mixing this thing down, and then Mine listens to it, and I come back, and I'm heading back to California. And here's another Baba lover that many people may not know, but she's really was a heavy. Her name was Hildy Halpern, and she was a therapist in London, and she's Eastern European. So she's talking out of the side of her mouth half the time because she's got this accent, you know what I mean? It's like, you know, from Yugoslavia or something like that. And she's in her 80s. And I met her before I went to India. So before I go, and this time I went coming in through London, and I met a great English guy named Lal Benbow. I don't even know if Lal's still alive, but wonderful guitar player, loved him to death. We were buddies right away. And another fellow, I can't forget his name, but we visited him up in Glasgow. He's an actor, American guy, came over to Glasgow. And Hildy just embraced me right away. And she offered me carte blanche therapy and guidance for the entire year that I was in London. And she also was friends with Pete Townsend. So she got me to meet people involved with Bob Oceanic. I knew Raphael Rudd, who was very involved with Bob Oceanic. And sometimes when you think about certain Baba lovers, some of these people aren't necessarily always popular with everybody. You know, I don't think that, like for example, here's another tangential move. When Jeff McGuire became in love with Mayor Baba, because that's what happened, he just, sorry, no more argument. Forget the debates. Okay, I get it. They were him and John Lind, the fellow that brought me to Phyllis's group, were the only two people that ever slept on the floor at the Mayor Baba Center in Los Angeles, only known to me and Phyllis Frederick because they were in transition. They're, you know, moving, or John was getting a divorce or whatever, so they got the sleeping bags out, slept on the floor for 2 or 3, 4 days, and only Phyllis and I knew that. And Hildy said, where are you going? She said, I'm going back to the United States. And she said, well, can you do here in London what you planning on doing in the United States? I said, yeah, I'm just planning on going back to play guitar and teach and so forth. She said, why don't you do it here? I said, okay, I'll give it a try. I said, I'll introduce you to some people and get you a place to stay and so forth. She said, you got me a place in Kilburn for the first part of my stay for about 2 months, and then I moved to kind of the Hampstead Heath Extension area. And I came to London from India with $2,000, and I took $1,600 of it and I bought a guitar. What did I know? Some guy. I went in, and that was cheap, you know, because this guitar was like beautiful. It's made by a first chair luthier that sat next to a famous luthier in England named Andrew Manson, who built for people like Jimmy Page and Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull and so forth. So his first chair guy was really remarkable too, but he was unknown. I bought one of his first 12 guitars for like, you know, 1,200 pounds, which at the time was worth about 16. So I had $400 left. I'm in London with $400. Who does that? And I move into this with this Baba lover, and I think I'm paying something like £30 a month for my room. And I took the rest of the money, besides feeding myself, and I took ads out in the local papers of all the private schools that existed in London, where all the kids' parents were reading the ads. And then I moved to an area closer to where the schools were, and by the time I left London, I had to say goodbye to 28 students, which wasn't not easy to do. And all of this was because Hildy Halpern had asked me, are you really in a hurry to get back to the United States? This is a Baba devotee that knows Townsend. And when I wasn't over at her house having therapy, she then would invite me twice a month to have dinner. She used to have very interesting dinners. I always remember her having white wine with pieces of fruit in it, like pineapple. And it wasn't like it wasn't like our glass of Chablis, it was something else, like a Gewürztraminer or something like that. Some, unusual, fruity, fragrant wine with a piece of fruit in it. And then the meals weren't particularly typical either. They were like, had an Eastern kind of slant to them, Eastern European slant. But she was so loving and so dedicated to Mara Baba. So whoever was able to come through her field, it was a blessing. This was another Western Mandali. Not too many people. Her husband worked on the bomb. She was in Los Alamos when they were working on the bomb. Can you believe that? Otto Halpern, I think was his name. And then he became a, wheelchair bound or paraplegic or something like that. And she took care of him. But this woman was sharp, and she was a bulldog. She wouldn't let you get away with anything, which was fantastic to have a therapist that doesn't let you get away from anything. And she also taught me more about how to teach people guitar. Not that I was a bulldog, but I wouldn't let them get away with sloppy habits because I'd teach. Also, the 3 East Indian teachers I had, Ali Akbar Khan, well-known sarod player, Ratnakar Vyas in London, also well-known, and one of Ravi Shankar's original devotees in Los Angeles, Hari Har Rao. They taught me what teaching was about because they came from the School of East Indian Teachers, which was a tremendous thousands of years of transmission. They weren't just some people that came off the road, went to Berklee College of Music, taught for 45 days and went back on the road and that was it, and gave you handouts. They wrapped their ears around you in the same way Brabazon did. And so did Hildy. And I'll tell you something else too. This is on the subject of bulldogs. There was a woman alive at that time in Ojai by the name of Agnes Barron. And if anybody's ever heard of Agnes Barron, here's another character that you either got to know or you didn't get to know. She wasn't easy to get to know. So Jeff McGuire at that point and I, now that he was a Baba lover, really no thanks to me. I just put up with his debates basically for several months until he came around on his own. I think as soon as he started reading things like the Discourses and God Speaks, he said, okay, this is enough already, I get it. So we used to go up to Ojai, we'd drive up to Los Angeles to visit Agnes, and Agnes lived in this house that at that point had completely been run down, the roof had fallen in, so she set up on the veranda of this house, and she lived on the veranda. It was an enclosed space, so smaller. She used the house for the toilet, and she took a shower using a hose hung over a tree. Agnes Barron. And if you went up to one of the things we loved, and we would stay in an outbuilding that was kind of like so old it was ridiculous, and then there was a beautiful tree on the property, like a banyan tree. And Mayor Bob was on this property, and he kind of had an assignment for her, and she kind of stayed put. And she was also one of the people that asked Mayor Bob, she says, you know what, Bob, I love you, but I don't necessarily like people. And I think his answer to her was, that's all you have to do is love me. You don't have to like everybody. You don't, it's like, and I, you know what, that was a big relief for me. Because there was a lot of Baba lovers I didn't like. But Mayor Baba used to say, love the lovers of God. He didn't say you had to like them. And Agnes Barron kind of drove that point home. So I'm up there a couple times, maybe once, twice a month. We bring up food, we're sitting on this porch, we're engaging in debates with Agnes Barron, who loved to kind of, you know, go back and forth with you. McGuire's this intelligent writer, loved to kind of get in there with her. And this is a true karma yogin, by the way. This is a woman that supported the Native Americans that were happening there. She'd always send people away, not just us, but we also heard, she'd say, what are you doing in the community to help others? What are you doing in Los Angeles to help others? The cool thing about Agnes is that McGuire would every so often, he would say something. She would kind of come back, she would be engaged in these conversations with us. I'd kind of sit back a little bit, and we brought good food up there, so we would snack and she'd eat, and then we'd take her down the hill to a Mexican restaurant, and she was happy as clams after that. You know, we were her heroes. And but we'd come up the next time, she'd bark at us right away, and we kind of we loved it. We just loved her barking at us. And so McGuire would throw something, he'd just lob this thing out into her consciousness that was completely left of the way she was thinking. And she'd stop. And she'd consider what he just said, and she said, really, do you think so? Because she'd been thinking this way for years, like, you know, how could I be wrong? And McGuire just kind of cut through that with some very poignant statement. He said, well, have you ever considered this? And she would like go like this, and suddenly it was like totally a completely different, no, the bulldog thing just disappeared. You really kind of felt her heart. And also, if you fed her, by the way, she also could feel her out, because things she really liked. She liked eating. And so Agnes, again, is another Western Mandali that maybe people don't know too much about, just like Hildy didn't know too much about. But these women were in the world, and they were stationed in such a place that they were like, I always feel like, you know, Mary always says there's, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me about the numbers, because the numbers aren't important, but one could say that of the billions of people in the world, there's a handful that are awake on whatever plane you want to talk about. I don't know anything about that. I couldn't tell you if they're on the first plane, or the fourth plane, or the fifth plane, or sixth plane. Baba could tell you that. He could tell you Krishnamurti was on the sixth plane. And Krishnamurti was another example of a guy that had no dirt on him. And one of the cool things about Krishnamurti was his parents were always trying to push him to declare that he was the one, and he would say, that's not me. Sorry. I love that about him. And his community was in Ojai, so when McGuire and I would go up to Ojai, we'd drive around the neighborhood where Krishnamurti's ashram was, and when you were outside of the neighborhood where all of his followers lived, the neighborhood was just plain. Dried up lawns, nothing special with the landscaping. But then as soon as you drove into the area where all of his lovers were, it was like something out of Findhorn. I mean, one block to the next, suddenly everything is blooming. Big roses and flowers, and you're going, what happened? You know what I mean? Just, you know, you look back and it's like, you know, that looks like a trailer park over there. Now you're like, you know, uptown or something like that. And then you drive out of that neighborhood and you're back into the dead zone. So, and Agnes liked Krishnamurti too, and they knew each other. So, you know, there were these women Mandali in the West that are kind of a little bit more under the radar than the ones that we think of. But boy, they're significant. They certainly were significant to me. So as much as I loved meeting all of the women Mandali at that Christmas gathering, and then later on meeting with Jane, and also, by the way, Phyllis Ott was a bulldog too. She didn't get along with everybody, but she got along with me. And I saw her in the kitchen about 2 days ago. Check this out. She comes in. I thought she passed away, but she had died, just walking around. And she comes in and she looks beautiful. And she's dressed up in a long sweater and very nice, kind of dressed to the nines, to tell you the truth. And she comes into I always call it the trajectory, but it's the refectory kitchen or whatever it's called, right? Is that what it's called?
Right.
Yeah. I don't know why I refer to it as the trajectory kitchen, but anyway, I walked in there and Phyllis walks in. I recognize her right away. And I say, Phyllis, my name is Richard Peikoff. I was here in 92 for 6 months, 3 months on either side each time when Jane was alive. And I sat with you in your house and we had lunch with you and me and Lynn. And she looked at me and she says, I remember you. We're friends. That was her first comment to me. And she was in the kitchen doing what I was doing, which was scrounging the communal area to see if there's something to get. She was shopping. So I said, what can I do for you? You hungry? And she said, well, what's in the fridge? So I went in the fridge and I saw that there was some milk in there. She wanted some milk. And there was something else that would look good to her. And so I made a bag for her, and she said to me, she thanked me very much, and she walked out. And as I kind of walked out after her, she was walking down the Pine Needle Pass, one of the beautiful parts of the center. It's all pine needles and sand and so forth. And she was walking really strong. She like, was she 92 or something like that? She didn't have a cane. Or if she had a cane, she wasn't using it. She's just walking. And she said, you know, I'm 92, 93. I said, Phyllis, you look absolutely gorgeous. She smiled. She said, we're going to be friends. We're friends. And I said, we were friends back in 1991 too. I said, because you were great. You and Lynn were great hosts to me, and I remember you. And so she's also, you have to remember her also as being part of the group of women. I think women played such an integral part. In India, it's obvious. There's the Mandali. And if you're there early enough to meet all of these women, you know, it's like, for example, the men couldn't touch and vice versa. There was no physical contact with Mara. Men didn't touch Mara. I think that was a given, or possibly something ordained by Baba. But didn't mean we couldn't get close to her. So when there was events on her porch, when we go visit her on her porch, if we wanted to play some guitar for her, we could sit away from her, you know, if the porch is big enough, and play some guitar music. I remember doing that. Either on the porch or slightly off the porch, I don't remember. But I do remember playing some guitar for Mira, and she loved it. All these Mandali were so girlish. You know, and when I say that, that's a compliment. My late sister-in-law died of cancer at 64 of a hidden melanoma. She was like that too. She was awake, and she was the head of ICU at Santa Monica St. Joseph's Hospital, Santa Monica Hospital. She had Marlon Brando and Jimmy Stewart in her ward at the same time on Christmas Eve. And Jimmy Stewart, star of It's a Wonderful Life, was saying, no one's missing me tonight on Christmas Eve. And Marlon Brando's talking about the Native Americans, Indians, what he's going to do when he gets out of the hospital. And my sister-in-law, Dee, was the head charge nurse, still wore whites. And she was my mentor. And women's so important. And she appreciated Mary Bob too. And so women, you're saturated. You were saturated with the presence of women Mandali when you went to India. You couldn't miss them. Why would you want to? Just got to Marazad, they're all there, except for Mansari. And Jim Mistry's wife. And then, but in the West, you had to look a little bit harder because they were in little, enclaves of places. They were in Myrtle Beach, they might be in Los Angeles, they were up on Ojai in the mountain, they were stuck in a, Hyde Park or whatever like that. You had to find them, you had to track them down. And I'm glad I was able to meet so many of them. And also Francis in Australia. So I think I met a lot of modeling, to tell you the truth. That was a big blessing. And I don't have to think about any particular detail of what to do or how to behave or whatever. These places were not ashrams. They were pilgrim centers. You made a pilgrimage to India. There were rules about how to live in the pilgrim center, as there are here in Myrtle Beach, but we don't come and have meditation schedules in the morning and silent time before meals and so forth. Everybody's talking. One of my favorite places to be is in the kitchens. And Kitty's tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, I guess we'll think that just makes me laugh because it's just like she was cooking for like, you know, adolescents or something like that, which we were. We didn't know anything. And so I would have to say, and you know, although I never met Mayor Baba, and I had just learned about him in Berkeley maybe 2 months after his passing, or 2.5 months, 10 weeks after his passing, and felt an affinity almost immediately. And even the people that introduced me to him weren't necessarily, they went on to be Tibetan Buddhists and TM specialists and so forth, but they had respect for Mayor Baba, but they didn't necessarily become followers of Mayor Baba. But as soon as they introduced me to Mayor Baba, there wasn't anybody else. Which means that in all these different organizations that I lived in, all these different spiritual communities, whether there was, you know, urban or rural, you know, on ranches and Brandeis Barden Institute, running kosher kitchens with rabbis assigned mashgiach, praying over things and watching the cooks, making sure they weren't using a cheese knife on a meat dish. Sorry, you know, into the side room has to be, you know, no longer kosher. And there didn't seem to be any kind of, as much as there is written by him and about Mayor Baba, I think that once, for me, once you make the connection to Mayor Baba, it speaks for itself, the difference between being a crooked person and being a vertical person. If your thoughts are one way and your speech is another and your actions are another way, you're crooked. But if your thoughts and your words and your actions are in alignment, then you really have the power to act as a bhakti yogin or a karma yogin. And nobody has to tell you how to do it in a particular way, because there isn't any particular way. It's unique to all of us. And that's one of the great things the Mandali demonstrated. They didn't have to tell you how to be a certain way. They just showed you how to be a certain way, because they just acted naturally the way who they were. And you got it. You know, they just behaved. And they didn't have it easy. Didn't sound to me like they had it easy. That new life sounded like it was pretty difficult to me. I don't know about you, but you know, 16 men and 4 women, a bunch of animals, kind of traveling around for 2 years. So, and Baba's saying, don't tell anybody, don't call me master, brother, elder brother, you know. Don't want to let on. And
They had to be cheerful the whole time, no matter what.
And here's a cool story. He goes and he's a vegetarian, right? But there's a story where he goes and everyone knows the story, where he goes and has dinner at one of his lover's house that serves him mutton. Now, does he say no? Why? Because he didn't want to insult his lover. So he's having some lamb or something like that, which he never eats, because he wanted to pay respect to his lover. So I like that. You know, it's like there's this code. It's a certain kind of nobility, and with it comes a certain responsibility, and it's uniquely your own. And you'll know whether or not you're crooked or whether you're vertical, because it's really in your face if you're not. Like when I teach guitar, I zero in on students, and I don't let them get away with anything. They have to play me a full clean chord, and they can't just strum an E minor chord and have half the strings pressed down. I say, okay, so arpeggiate that chord and play each note individually so I can hear what you're playing. So we hear note, note, thumb, mute, note, note. And I'm going, well, you only got 60% of the chord, so you have to learn how to press it. Oh, your nails are too long. You might want to trim them first, because your nails are hitting the fingerboard before your fingers are. My students love this because they know and by the way, I've been teaching hour lessons for the last 35 years, but no lessons are any shorter than 90 minutes. So everybody gets a 90-minute lessons, they pay for an hour. And these are people that are much wealthier than I do, but that's just the way I teach. Because it's not like 50 minutes up, you're off the couch. Sorry, you know, no, that's it, and a guitar lesson. I send people out the door when I know that they have enough to work on for the next week until they see me. And for the last 90 minutes, I wouldn't let them get away with anything. And they laugh at that because they just love it. You know what I mean? It's probably the highest level of karma yoga that I could actually do on any given day is teach, which is why between teaching, performing, composing, and recording, and session work, and so forth, teaching is actually number one on my list. Because it's in real time with people sitting across the table that you're actually interacting with and having this opportunity to share this loop, and you can feel it, of love. It's a very loving thing. Your students know that you love you, that you love them, and you know that you're being loved by your students, and it's not projecting when you're going to be famous, or is the music industry going to like this, or I hope I get this project, or whatever. That's all a bunch of crap. It's about you're talking to somebody, and they're actually learning how to play Hey Jude. Or a higher end student is learning how to improvise on slide, or open tunings, or fingerstyle, if they're good enough to do it. And they all get the same treatment by me, is I'm paying attention. And that's what I learned from the Mandali. They pay attention. They paid attention. Rabazan totally paid attention. That evening with Sam and I'm still there. I can see it. I can tell you. I can taste the tea. The Western Mandali paid attention. Jane was so abundant here to allow me to stay 3 months on either side of a 3-month trip. Who does that? Nobody. Barbara Plews, by the way. I can't say enough about her. She's helped me a lot. And then these other quieter women Mandali that are located in different places. That's like, I was saying earlier, one of my tangential moments, that I think that I get the sense that of the billions of people that are in the world, there may be tens of thousands of men and women that are awake to a certain degree on a plane, possibly, that we don't know about or we do know about. Now, if we were followers of Krishnamurti, we would have had exposure. I think Baba said he was a sixth-plane saint. We would have had the blessing of being around a sixth-place saint. But I think sometimes when we go into the market, there might be somebody at checkout that's also like a second degree, you know what I mean? And she's always like bright and cheerful and loving, and you have this thing from her, and you go, why is she so happy working at Kroger's, for Christ's sakes? It's what's the big deal? Well, because there's something else going on there. Kroger's doesn't define her. Something else is defining her. Or him, or whatever. So I think that we are, and it's a funny thing too, I think it's that for all of the greed and lust, in Buddhism, the big three things that need to be transmuted are greed, lust, and anger. And the interesting thing is, I think Baba talked about this too, that, at least this is my take on it, just from a musician's point of view. If you look at an EQ, like used to be on a, back in the days when you had analog, tuners and so forth, and a record player and, speakers the size of, monoliths. The point wasn't to have your life completely over on the bass side, or even all the way to the treble. The objective was to get to that click in the center, which was totally flat. That's the flat setting in music. It's not a boost of bass or a cut of bass or a boost of treble or a cut of treble. And Baba said something I thought was quite interesting. He said, you can be bound as easily by a golden chain as you can by a leaden chain. And we keep reincarnating, it seemed, if I got my habits wrong, in order to be able to kind of balance out that sense of sanskars, like to where there's nothing left, no good or bad. It's a complete flat setting, totally acoustic, no effects, like an electric guitar running through fuzz tones, stuff like that. You're just in the present, then you're gone. And that leaden chain golden thing has been with me a long time, also that concept of neti, not this, not that, not this, not that. The last 6 months I've been on the road seeking cancer care because I was unhappy with what happened in Southern California. They blew my care and sent my markers that took me 2.5 years to get at, and they sent it up 1,200% in the wrong direction. This freaked me out. So I said, forget this, I'm going to go seek out some cancer center, a second and third opinions from comprehensive cancer centers, which I did. And there were so many weeks on end in which I had no idea what I was doing. Didn't no longer seem to be visionary. It seemed to be very reactive living. But at the end of the day, especially with this, I took a concussion. I took a fall here on the center, went down really hard, and I'm just at the end of healing from that. It's been 16, 17 days now. Barbara Plew has been quite the advocate for that. And this whole trip has kind of ended up in this movement from expectation, expecting things, to accepting things. Now that's a huge shift. Now that doesn't mean you work any less harder. It doesn't mean like the pressure's off. Okay, now you accept everything and you surrender. It's not like that. And also one thing I learned a long time ago, don't ask Mayor Baba for anything. But you just might get it. And the person that asked for it might not be the same person that gets it later on. You know that statement, you can't put your foot in the same river twice? You know what that means, right?
Yeah.
Because if you take your foot out of the river and put it back in, that river's already been moving. There's never the same river. It's always a different river. Same foot? Maybe.
Not really.
But the foot's changed too. You know what I mean? Because time. We're all time bound. So you can't put your foot in the same river twice. So my life has been about neti for the last 6 months. I haven't known what I'm doing, but I know what I don't want to do. So instead of, sometimes there was a story about the mule walking down a road and seeing a pile of hay on this side of the road and a pile of hay on this side of the road and saying, oh, I'm going to go over here on this side of the road. Oh, wait, this pile looks a little bit better. And by the time he goes on the road, he misses both piles and doesn't eat at all. Not this pile, not that pile. Keeps going straight down the road, you know what I mean? Now, I might be mixing my metaphors, but it was the same kind of thing. It's like the combination of this neti thing and also not asking Baba for anything because I don't want to ask for help. I know lots of people say, Baba, please, I need this and so forth. Personally, I think that's a big mistake. You know, he knows what you need. Just get vertical. And that's it. That's all you need to do. So, I'll wrap this up and I'll just say that I don't know anything. So if you're listening to this and however long this has gone on, probably more longer than I need to be, hopefully you laughed on occasion because I have, and also the people I'm sitting here, we kind of chuckled. I mentioned to you every Mandali I could have met that maybe many of you have heard of, and many of you maybe never heard of, but they were in the world and they were acting, and they were beautiful people. And don't believe the stories about the bulldogs, because the bulldogs is not true. It's totally subjective. It's how you meet these people. Philosop's not a bulldog. Agnes Barron wasn't a bulldog. They had hearts that just were totally melted away. As soon as you figured out how to cut through, Jeff McGuire lobbing these things through Agnes Barron's screen was like such a remarkable thing, because then she'd stop being and she'd go like that, and suddenly it was like, oh, by the way, let's go out and have some Mexican food. And she'd go, okay, great, let's do that, you know. It's just girlish again, you know what I mean? But then you get back and you later on, just like totally, you know, barking and so forth. We just laughed at this thing, and you know, so I think there's a legacy that's been left for us. If you read all the beautiful books that have been written, first of all, you will not find on the planet a book like God Speaks, let alone the book like Discourses. These are two fantastic books. Discourses is a little bit easier to, I think, to ingest, but it's got a lot. God Speaks, good luck with that, you know what I mean? But it's gorgeous, especially the illustrations in there as well. But you could spend I think the first time I read it took me maybe 18 months to get through it. I could only take small little vignettes of it, you know. And the discourses I could read all the time, though. And then all the stories, they were written by the Mandali. Now we have all the people left that were around the Mandali and taking care of the Mandali, and they're writing books. So at some point, we're going to be gone too. So you're going to have people saying, well, I knew Richard Peikoff when he was, you know, that's you know, that's funny. It's like in Hollywood, first of all, it's like Steven Spielberg comes on the scene and he blows everybody away. So people say, get Spielberg to do that next movie. Okay, so they call him Spielberg and they say, hey Spielberg, we need you to do Schindler's List, something like that. And he says, no problem, got that. And we'll get John Williams to score the music, you know. And then it's like, Hollywood starts to get smart and they want to cut the budget and they get somebody like Steven Spielberg. You know what I mean? That's where it goes next, right? You know, don't get Spielberg, he's too expensive, but get someone like Steven Spielberg. And then, of course, that makes room for other directors to come forth and you know, and we get to know them too, or other composers to come forth, you know, Beltrami and whoever you know, I'll tell you my favorite composer is David Newman, Randy Newman's first cousin. When David Newman plays a score for a film, it's like Copland. It's so obvious that it's him, you know, big musician. And you could just feel the love in his playing. But it's like, get someone like David Newman. Okay? Because David Newman's expensive. But you want some good music? You get David Newman. You want a good director? You get Spielberg, for Christ's sakes. So, you know, you want a good guru? Go for Mayor Baba, because really, you know, you're cutting yourself short.
He's expensive.
He's expensive, but he's worth the price. You know, you get what you pay for.
Nothing less than everything.
There's the synopsis of this whole thing. You get what you pay for. You want a good avatar, a good guru? Go for Mayor Baba. The cost is expensive. It's like your life, for Christ's sakes. That's what it costs. Mm-hmm. But you have to think about it and you go, is my life worth that much to spend on being aligned with the avatar? And if the answer is yes, then you just made a good investment, because that's going to last you the rest of your life. What could be better? Or you can go to Payless Shoes and find a guru there, and you know, then you're going to get a pair of Korean-made shoes. They're going to fall apart in 3 months
closing.
Anyway. You know, so. Don't you know, I just, you know, it's a funny thing too, because I'll tell you 2 stories just to end with that really kind of, I think, are beautiful stories of people that came for Darshan with Mayor Baba, from my understanding. On a steamer that came from London to India, Gandhi was on the same steamer as Mayor Baba. Everybody knows the story. And Gandhi asked for Darshan. And actually, I saw a couple of weeks ago a beautiful film that was restored by Oceanic, had Mike Siegel playing sitar on it in the film, right? And other musicians, especially heavies like Hari Prasad Chareja, you know who that is? Mm-hmm. Flautist, played with John McLaughlin and so forth. And gorgeous, you know, everything was like completely restored. And it was like the Portofino time, right? And all the women Mandali, all Western Mandali, they thought were coming out to hang out with Baba for the longest times, and then he sent them back, right? And they were all crying and in tears and so forth. And there's also a strange thing that he did where he's walking along the coastline against this rocky mountain, which is only like if you're a mountain goat could you scale up to the upper esplanade. And he disappears around the bend and they can't find him. And about 10 minutes later they look up and he's up at the top of the mountain. It's like one of those Don Juan, Don Gennaro things with, you know, Carlos Castaneda, where they're always fooling around with, screwing with Carlos's mind, like, you know, because they're like whatever they were. And so Baba's, you know, they tried to get up to, they sent people out looking for the model because they got all lost kind of trying to climb the mountain. But so they're wondering, how did Mayor Baba get up on the top of this mountain, you know, in like 15 minutes, you know? Well, think about it. So Gandhi goes and he has this is the last of my tangential things. At this point, consider that the band is now playing Miles Davis's Bitches Brew, because that's where it's gone from. We started out with the Ten Gentlemen playing a nice pop song, and all the stories I've just told is there's been so many stories going in so many different directions that we're all at a different part. And if you've ever seen Miles during the time, he had 3 significant albums all around the late 60s, and the cool thing about Miles Davis, if you know anything about music or you don't, in his band, during Bitches Brew, On the Corner, and Big Fun, all taking place in the late 60s, early 70s, he had everybody in that band that later on went to do their own fusion bands. He had Joe Zawinul and Wayne Shorter that went on to do Weather Report. Chick Corea returned to Forever. Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters. John McLaughlin and Shakti. They were all in the same band. On the same album. Because it was Miles. And when Miles would come on stage, the band would be kind of already playing. I saw this at the Troubadour. It's only like 350 seats unless they paid off the fire marshal. Then there was 425 seats. And the band was playing and Miles would come down. The band was in a groove, playing something. He'd get up on stage, some big glasses, looked like a bee. His horn in his hand, and he'd stand there by his organ for a minute, and then he'd go like this. And the band would shift. And everybody would go in a different direction. But they were all in this groove, you know what I mean? And that's how he called out his changes. Whenever he made a change, he made some kind of gesture to the left or the right or up, and the band moved with him. And they just moved. And for as much differentiation there was in that band, the whole thing sounded like, this is cohesive. So you can't take for granted the Ten Gentlemen. The Ten Gentlemen actually have something to say. So Gandhi, this is getting back to the Gandhi thing. Gandhi goes into Mayor Baba, has darshan. I would imagine that one of the Western men is interpreting for Baba at this point, unless Baba is still using his alphabet board, which he could have been because I think he was using it for 18 years, or 28 years. So he might have still been using it. And Gandhi asked him the question, I think this is the correct story, and he said, well, I experienced self-realization this lifetime. And Baba said to him, no. Gandhi was freaked. He was flipped out. And they said, why? He said, because you're in the world living the life of a bodhisattva. And a bodhisattva is the guy that opens the door of the tavern where everybody goes in to get drunk on the wine of God. And he's like the bouncer. He's the last guy to leave the tavern. Everybody goes to the door first before him. And he goes. In the last call, and he goes to the door. And that's the role you're playing in this life by being in jail, by taking walks to the sea for salt, by trying to bring the Muslims and the Hindus together. You're in the world. Now, if you go back to your ashram and just spin cotton and, be a vegetarian and don't go back out in the world, then the answer is yes. And Gandhi was so relieved to hear that, from my understanding, because he finally had an understanding from the master. And if you look at this film in Portofino, when Baba comes to the West, it says Gandhi's Guru in the headlines. It's right there on the paper, in some English paper. Gandhi's Guru coming to the West, Mayor Baba. Well, everyone knew who Gandhi was, but no one knew who Mayor Baba was yet. And then the other darshan story is Rajneesh came to Mayor Baba decades later, and he asked for darshan, and Mayor Baba says, you're going to be a really popular guy, and you got to be careful. Because if you steer somebody down the wrong path, not only have you done them damage, but you're going to take on their sanskaras. Now there's a heavy thought to think about. Not that I have to worry about stuff like that, because I'm not taking anybody down the path. But, and also Rajneesh's mother was pushing him to be declared something like, that he was the guy. But I think they just settled for a red Rolls Royce and a gold Rolls Royce and a black Rolls Royce instead, whatever.
A lot of women.
And a lot of women, and a lot of sex, and a lot of trysts, and a lot of everything. And he was a very popular guy. But I think, and he got sick, by the way. And I think his sickness, his physical sickness, was exactly what Baba warned him again. He said, you got to be careful. Because if you end up misdirecting people, you're going to take on their karma. their sanskars, and he did. Gandhi got it. Beautiful story. Rajneesh didn't get it. And so let that be a lesson to you, whoever's listening to this thing.
Right on.
Gandhi, Ben Kingsley, good movie. Rajneesh book, think twice about that. And now we get to stop because we're going to either have a bunch of cookies